Story 1. In the heart of a desolate town, shrouded in mist and mystery, stood the forgotten cemetery. Its ancient gates creaked with the weight of years, rust gnawing at their iron frames. Tombstones, weathered by time, leaned in a haphazard dance, as if whispering secrets to each other in the dead of night. Few dared to venture into its depths, for the stories whispered among the townsfolk spoke of curses and restless spirits. One chilly autumn evening, a group of curious teenagers decided to test their courage. Sarah, bold and adventurous, led the expedition. Her friends, Jake, Emily, and Alex, followed hesitantly behind her as they approached the cemetery gates. The moon cast eerie shadows upon the uneven ground, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. "We shouldn't be here," Emily whispered, clutching her jacket tightly. "Oh, come on, Em. Where's your sense of adventure?" Sarah teased, flashing a mischievous grin. Reluctantly, the group pushed open the creaking gates and stepped into the graveyard. The silence was palpable, broken only by the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot. Sarah led them deeper into the maze of tombstones, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon. As they wandered among the graves, they felt a strange sense of unease settling over them. Shadows seemed to shift and dance in the corners of their vision, and the air grew colder with each passing moment. Suddenly, Jake stumbled over something hidden in the grass, sending him crashing to the ground with a yelp. Alex rushed to help him up, but froze when he saw what had caused Jake's fall. Half buried in the earth was an old, weathered book, its pages yellowed with age. Intrigued, Sarah reached down and picked it up, dusting off the cover. The words, "Grave Whispers," were etched into the leather in faded gold letters. "What is it?" Emily asked, peering over Sarah's shoulder. "I'm not sure," Sarah replied, flipping through the pages. "But it looks like some kind of journal." As Sarah read aloud from the journal, a sense of dread crept over the group. The entries spoke of strange occurrences in the cemetery, whispers in the night, shadowy figures lurking among the tombstones, and the feeling of being watched from the darkness. "We should go," Emily said, her voice trembling. "This place gives me the creeps." But before they could make their escape, a bone-chilling wail echoed through the graveyard, freezing them in their tracks. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the tombstones seemed to groan in protest. "We need to get out of here, now," Sarah shouted, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her towards the gates. But as they turned to flee, they were met with a sight that stopped them in their tracks. Standing before them, bathed in moonlight, was a figure cloaked in shadow, a figure that seemed to be made of mist and memory. "Who are you?" Jake stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure said nothing, but beckoned them closer with a ghostly hand. Mesmerized, the group approached, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they drew near, the figure began to speak, its voice a haunting echo in the night. "I am the guardian of this cemetery," it intoned, its words sending shivers down their spines. "For centuries, I have watched over the souls laid to rest here, protecting them from harm." "But why?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because this cemetery holds a dark secret," the figure replied. "A secret that must never be unearthed." As the figure spoke, the ground began to quake once more, and the air filled with the sound of unearthly moans. Shadows twisted and writhed around them, coalescing into ghostly forms that reached out with icy fingers. "We have to leave, now," Sarah shouted, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her away from the figure. But as they turned to run, they found their path blocked by a wall of darkness, solid and impenetrable. "We're trapped," Jake cried, panic rising in his voice. Desperate, Sarah turned back to the figure, her eyes pleading for mercy. "Please," she whispered, "let us go." But the figure only shook its head, its eyes filled with sorrow. "I cannot," it said. "The darkness has awakened, and it will not rest until it has claimed its due." With a final, mournful wail, the figure vanished into the night, leaving the group alone in the cemetery. Terrified and alone, they huddled together, knowing that they would never escape the curse of the graveyard. And as the darkness closed in around them, they heard the whispers of the dead, echoing through the night for all eternity. Story 2. In the heart of the small town of Midnight Hollow, nestled between ancient trees and forgotten whispers, stood an old burial ground. The cemetery had been there for centuries, its tombstones weathered by time and tales of the dead. Few dared to venture near, for they knew the stories that lurked within its shadows, tales of restless spirits and a darkness that hungered for the living. Among the townsfolk, there was a legend whispered in hushed tones, a legend of a family cursed by the cemetery's dark past. The Johnsons were the unfortunate souls who had once called Midnight Hollow their home. Generations ago, they had made a pact with the darkness that dwelled within the burial ground, and ever since, tragedy had followed them like a shadow. It was on a moonless night in October that the latest generation of Johnsons, siblings Ethan and Lily, found themselves drawn to the cemetery's edge. Ethan, brave and foolhardy, had heard the whispers of the townsfolk and scoffed at their superstitions. Lily, however, felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach as they approached the rusted gates. "Ethan, we shouldn't be here," Lily murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be ridiculous, Lily," Ethan replied, his tone dismissive. "There's nothing to be afraid of." But even as he spoke the words, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of unease that prickled at the back of his neck. The air felt heavy with the weight of centuries, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. Ignoring his sister's protests, Ethan pushed open the creaking gates and stepped into the cemetery. The ground beneath their feet was soft with fallen leaves, and the silence was suffocating. As they wandered among the tombstones, Ethan felt a strange pull tugging at his senses. It was as if the very earth beneath him was whispering secrets long forgotten, urging him to uncover the truth hidden within the shadows. "Lily, do you feel that?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heartbeat. Lily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave, Ethan. This place isn't safe." But before they could make their escape, a voice echoed through the darkness, a voice that sent shivers down their spines. "Welcome, children," it said, its tone filled with malice. "I have been expecting you." Ethan and Lily spun around, their hearts pounding in their chests. Standing before them was a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning like embers in the night. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure chuckled, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "I am the guardian of this cemetery, and you have trespassed on sacred ground." Before Ethan could respond, the ground began to tremble beneath their feet, and the tombstones around them began to glow with an otherworldly light. "We have to go, now," Lily cried, grabbing her brother's hand and pulling him towards the gates. But as they turned to flee, they found their path blocked by a wall of darkness, solid and impenetrable. "We're trapped," Ethan shouted, panic rising in his voice. The figure advanced towards them, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "You cannot escape the darkness, children. It has claimed you as its own." Desperate, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, an heirloom passed down through generations of Johnsons. With a whispered prayer, he held it aloft, hoping against hope that it would protect them from the darkness that threatened to consume them. To their astonishment, the pendant began to glow with a brilliant light, pushing back the shadows and illuminating the darkness with its pure radiance. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. "No. This cannot be." With a final, desperate cry, the figure vanished into the night, leaving Ethan and Lily alone in the cemetery once more. Breathless and shaken, they stumbled out of the graveyard and into the safety of the moonlit night. As they made their way home, they knew that they had faced something truly evil, but they also knew that they had emerged victorious, armed with nothing but their courage and the light of their ancestors to guide them. Story 3. In the heart of the sleepy town of Willowbrook lay an abandoned graveyard, forgotten by time and shrouded in darkness. The cemetery, once a place of solace and remembrance, had fallen into disrepair, its tombstones weathered by years of neglect. But beneath the overgrown weeds and crumbling mausoleums, a sinister presence lurked, a curse that had haunted the town for generations. Among the townsfolk, the legend of the graveyard was whispered in hushed tones, a tale of a curse that had been unleashed upon the land by a vengeful spirit. It was said that long ago, a witch had been wronged by the townspeople and had placed a curse upon the graveyard as her final act of revenge. Since then, those who dared to enter the cemetery had been met with misfortune and tragedy. It was on a foggy evening in late October that a group of friends, drawn by curiosity and the thrill of adventure, decided to explore the abandoned graveyard. Among them were Claire, a brave and headstrong young woman, Mark, her loyal and steadfast friend, and Emily, a timid but curious soul who was easily swayed by Claire's adventurous spirit. As they approached the graveyard's rusted gates, Claire's excitement was palpable. "This is going to be so much fun," she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the mist. Mark glanced nervously at Emily, who was chewing on her lip in apprehension. "Are you sure about this, Claire? The stories about this place are pretty creepy." Claire rolled her eyes, brushing off his concerns. "Oh, come on, Mark. Don't tell me you're scared of a few ghost stories." With a resigned sigh, Mark followed Claire as she pushed open the creaking gates and stepped into the graveyard. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the mist clung to their skin like icy fingers. As they wandered among the tombstones, Claire's excitement began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The graveyard seemed to stretch on endlessly, its shadows twisting and shifting in the darkness. "Maybe we should go back," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. But Claire shook her head, her eyes gleaming with determination. "No way. We came here to explore, and that's exactly what we're going to do." As they ventured deeper into the graveyard, they began to notice strange markings etched into the tombstones, symbols of an ancient language long forgotten by the world above. Claire reached out to touch one of the markings, but recoiled as if burned. "That's weird," she muttered, her brow furrowed in confusion. Before they could investigate further, a cold wind swept through the graveyard, sending chills down their spines. The mist thickened around them, obscuring their vision and turning the world into a hazy blur. Suddenly, they heard a voice, a whisper in the darkness, barely audible but filled with malice. "Who dares to disturb my slumber?" it hissed, sending shivers down their spines. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the graveyard, searching for the source of the voice. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. But there was no response, only the sound of their own ragged breathing and the eerie silence of the graveyard. As they turned to leave, they found their path blocked by a wall of darkness, solid and impenetrable. "We're trapped," Emily cried, her voice rising in panic. Claire's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out of their predicament. But before she could come up with a plan, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the tombstones around them began to glow with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, figures began to emerge from the shadows, twisted and contorted shapes that seemed to flicker and fade in the mist. "We have to get out of here, now," Mark shouted, grabbing Claire's hand and pulling her towards the gates. But as they ran, they found themselves pursued by the shadowy figures, their eyes burning with hatred and hunger. With a final burst of strength, they pushed through the gates and stumbled out into the night, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, they knew that they had narrowly escaped the curse of the abandoned graveyard. But as they looked back at the looming shadows of the tombstones, they couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness still lingered, waiting patiently for its next victims. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.